I want to begin not with theory, not with statistics, not even with the grand pronouncements of a so-called expert, but with a moment of raw, unflinching honesty, a moment that still embarrasses me, though I have told it many times. I was 71 years old, arriving at Vancouver Airport after a long flight, tired in body and thin in patience. My phone lit up with a text from my wife, Rame, my partner of decades, the woman who has seen me at my best and far too often at my worst. She wrote simply, "Do you still want a lift home? I haven't left the house yet." And I, physician, author, speaker on trauma and healing, a man who has spent his life telling others to pause, to breathe, to inquire gently into the origins of their pain, I replied with 2 words, "Never mind." I got home, I growled a hello, and for the next 24 hours I barely made eye contact. I moved through our house like a storm cloud, silent, brooding, unreachable. Is this, I ask you now as I asked myself then, is this the response of a mature adult in his 8th decade of life? Of course not, and yet it happened, and it happens still in quieter ways, even now at 79. But here is where the light begins to enter the wound. At times like this, there is very little grown-up Gabor in the mix. Most of me is in the grips of the distant past, this physio-emotional time warp, this sudden displacement from the present moment into a childhood state of alarm, abandonment, and rage is one of the clearest imprints of trauma. And it is not unique to me. It is, in fact, one of the underlying themes for so many of us in this culture. Let me take you back to the template of that hostility. I was born in January 1944 in Budapest, Hungary, into a Jewish family living under Nazi occupation. In May of that same year, the systematic deportation of Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz began. By the end of the Holocaust, 565,000 Hungarian Jews had been murdered. My maternal grandparents were among them. I never knew them, I never heard their voices, but their absence echoes in me still. When I was 11 months old, barely able to walk, barely able to form memories in the way we understand them, my mother made a decision that saved my life and scarred my soul. She handed me to a stranger, my aunt, and sent me away from the Budapest ghetto. I quote her diary in my book, The Myth of Normal, because her words deserve to be heard. "My dear little man, I have to part with you because your little organism could not possibly endure the living conditions in the fenced-in Budapest ghetto. She did not abandon me out of indifference. She did it out of love, and yet, to an infant brain wired for attachment above all else, separation from the primary caregiver is not just loss, it is existential threat. The body floods with stress hormones. The nervous system goes into survival mode. The heart learns before language, before conscious thought, that to be left is to die. This, my friends, is the essence of trauma. The word comes from the Greek trauma, wound. But trauma is not what happens to you. It is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. It is not the blow on the head. It is the concussion. It is not the separation. It is the belief, formed in the wordless depths of infancy, that I am not worth staying for, that I am not lovable, that my needs do not matter. And here is the good news, the liberating truth that has guided my work for decades. If the trauma is in the event, it is fixed forever. But if the trauma is in the wound, the internal decision, the meaning I made, then that wound can heal at any time. We must learn to distinguish between 2 kinds of wounds. There are the capital T traumas, the catastrophic events, physical or sexual abuse, the death of a parent, war, genocide, displacement. Then there are the small T traumas, the quieter, more pervasive injuries. You can wound a child not only by doing terrible things to them, but by failing to meet their authentic needs, by being emotionally unavailable, by prioritizing your own stress over their presence, by teaching them, subtly or overtly, that their feelings are too much, too inconvenient, too dangerous to express, Even the most loving parents, and I include myself in this confession, can inflict small traumas without ever meaning to. I know this because I did it to my own children. I was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, lost in my work, my compulsions, my unresolved pain, and they felt it, they carried it, and now, as adults, we are still untangling the threads. But let me be absolutely clear. Trauma is not an excuse. It is an explanation. There comes a point, and in that airport incident, it came the next morning, when Hitler made me do it won't fly. We are responsible for our behavior in the present, even as we extend compassion to the child within who is still screaming. Trauma does not live only in the individual, it lives in the collective. It is woven into the fabric of society. Look at the history of Canada's Indigenous peoples, the forced removal of children into residential schools, the erasure of language, culture, and kinship. The result: epidemics of addiction, suicide, chronic illness, passed down through generations like a toxic inheritance. Or consider the legacy of slavery and systemic racism in the United States, how the trauma of dehumanization echoes in cardiovascular disease, maternal mortality, incarceration rates. We pass on to our offspring what we have not resolved in ourselves. This is the mechanism of multigenerational trauma, and left unhealed, it shapes everything: how you see yourself, how you see the world, what triggers you, what you believe is possible, the kinds of relationships you form or fail to form. And yes, it shows up in the body, in autoimmune disease, in cancer, in heart failure, in depression that feels like drowning. Even now, at 79, I am still discovering how these imprints rise to the surface. Let me tell you about something that happened recently, something that shook me more than I expected. In early March, I sat down for a live-streamed conversation with Prince Harry. We spoke of grief, of childhood wounds, of the possibility of healing. It was a vulnerable human exchange, and then the internet did what the internet does. Headlines screamed, "Holocaust survivor who hails Hamas as heroes," a grotesque distortion of a nuanced position on justice and occupation. I was called a so-called trauma expert. My suggestion that Harry showed traits of attention deficit disorder, something I was diagnosed with in my mid-50s, was twisted into a diagnosis of disease. Even my collarless shirt, yes, the shirt, was mocked. I thought at my age I was beyond this. I thought I had outgrown the need to be seen accurately, but no, for days I was roiling inside, upset, ashamed, small. I called a psychiatrist friend and poured it out. He listened, then asked one question: "What is it about this that hurts so much?" And in that moment, I saw it. It wasn't the disagreement. It wasn't even the misrepresentation. It was not being seen, to be distorted, to be reduced, to be turned into a caricature, that triggered the infant in me who was handed to a stranger and told, "You must survive without me." For that child, not being seen was a death sentence. As soon as my friend named it, I felt something release in my chest. I exhaled. I came back to the present. Let me clarify what I said to Prince Harry about Ad, because this too was misunderstood. I did not diagnose him with a disease. I said, "You have no disease, you have a normal response to abnormal circumstances. When a child grows up under chronic stress, whether from war, loss, public scrutiny, or parental absence, what does the developing brain do? It tunes out, it dissociates, it fragments attention as a coping mechanism. This is not pathology, this is adaptation, and yes, though many in mainstream science would disagree, I believe it is reversible through compassion, awareness, and the rewiring that comes with authentic connection." Now, I know my views on Israel and Palestine have made me a controversial figure. They have cost me dearly. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, I was 23 years old. I dared to say, publicly, to my family, that Israel had launched a preemptive war to occupy territory and would never return it. My father, A Holocaust survivor who had lost everything to antisemitism kicked me out of the house. For a time, Zionism had been my salvation. It was the first time I felt proud to be Jewish. But then I began to study the actual history, and the slogan, "A land without a people for a people without a land," collapsed under the weight of truth. There was a people there. There were villages. There were lives. My parents could not bear to hear this. For them, to question Israel was to question their survival, their dignity, their right to exist. My mother, especially. Her father had been a Zionist leader who perished in Auschwitz. To face the complexity I was naming would have felt like a betrayal of his memory. I understood their pain, I still do, and I held my truth anyway. This is where compassion becomes radical, because the real villain is not the individual. The real villain is culture, a culture that normalizes disconnection, domination, and dissociation from consequence. In the myth of normal, I use a simple analogy. Imagine a laboratory culture meant to sustain life, but which has become toxic, contaminated, unsuitable, even deadly for the organisms it was meant to support. This is our society. We are the organisms, and the toxicities are not abstract. They are stress chronic, unrelenting, cortisol-soaked ignorance of history, of science, of the body's wisdom, inequality, economic, racial, gendered, environmental degradation, poisoned air, water, soil, climate collapse, and existential trauma we refuse to grieve, poverty, not just material but spiritual, social isolation, the epidemic of loneliness in the age of hyperconnection. We have become so acculturated to this toxicity that we call it normal, but normal does not mean healthy. The central thesis of my book is this: those features of our daily life that now appear normal are the ones most desperately in need of scrutiny. We are like crustaceans placed in cold water, slowly heated to boiling. We do not jump out because the change is gradual. We adapt. We call it life. And so, the plagues of our time, addiction, depression, autoimmune disease, cancer, burnout, are not aberrations. They are natural responses to an unnatural environment. Let us speak of addiction. I spent 12 years working as a physician in Vancouver's downtown East Side, North America's most concentrated area of drug use. I came to know hundreds of people injecting heroin, smoking crack, living in doorways and shelters. And do you know what I learned? Every single one of my female patients, without exception, had been sexually abused in childhood or adolescence. Many were indigenous, many were caught in the sex trade. This was not coincidence. This was the multigenerational transmission of colonial trauma, the deliberate destruction of family, culture, and sovereignty. But addiction is not just heroin, it is not just alcohol, it is work, it is shopping, it is pornography, it is cell phones, it is extreme sports, it is any behavior we use to escape pain we cannot face. There is no such thing as an addictive personality. There is no addiction gene. Addiction is not a disease, it is a response. My mantra, born from those years on the East Side, is this: don't ask why the addiction. Ask why the pain. To understand the pain, you must understand the life, and here is the part that humbles me most. I was no different. During the same years I treated people dying from overdoses, I was severely addicted to work and to classical music compact discs. I would lie to my wife about how much money I spent. I once left a woman in labor in the hospital because I had to have a rare recording right then. I drove across the city, purchased it, and returned, obsessed, compulsive, unreachable. I told my patients this, and do you know what they said? "Doc, you're just like the rest of us." They were right. We are all just like the rest of us. The empathy gap exists because people project the parts of themselves they cannot bear onto a despised population, the junkie, the alcoholic, the homeless, rather than look in the mirror. What they disdain in them is the part of themselves they dare not see. So how did I come to see the water we're boiling in? How did I wake up? Part of it was my work as a family physician. For 20 years, I saw patients in their homes, in their lives. I knew them before they got sick. I saw the wife who developed multiple sclerosis after decades of repressing rage at an abusive husband. I saw the man with Crohn's disease who had never grieved his father's death. I saw the pattern. Illness does not strike randomly. It follows the fault lines of emotional suppression, but medical training does not prepare you for this. Physicians are taught a narrow, biological view of the body, as if the mind floats somewhere above, uninvolved. But if your eyes are open, you cannot help but notice. I began reading the vast scientific literature linking emotional dynamics to physical pathology. I wrote about it in my 2003 book, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. Stress causes inflammation. It erodes telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes. It turns on genes that promote cancer. A study from Harvard, published 4 years ago, showed that women with severe post-traumatic stress disorder had double the risk of ovarian cancer. Yet the average oncologist has never heard of it. Why? Because we treat the body as a machine, not as a living expression of biography. To say the mind is connected to the body is incorrect. To say the nervous system is connected to the immune system, which is connected to the emotional apparatus, which is connected to the hormone system, is incorrect. They are not connected. They are the same system. Every thought is a biochemical event. Every emotion is a physiological cascade. Every unresolved trauma is a cellular imprint. So what do I hope to achieve with all of this? With the books, the talks, the interviews, the risks? 5 years ago, I attended a workshop where I was asked to name my calling, what footprint I wished to leave. My answer was simple. I want people to be free. Free in the political realm, which is why I speak out on Israel and Palestine, on indigenous rights, on all forms of oppression. And free in the personal realm, so that we are no longer puppets on the strings of our trauma, jerked into rage, withdrawal, compulsion, or despair by forces we do not understand. You may agree with me. You may disagree, but that is my intention in everything I do. These days I am recognized in airports around the world. People run up to me, crying, shaking, thanking me for my work. It used to surprise me. Now I understand they are not thanking me. They are thanking the possibility of healing. And yes, I am well aware of what a flawed little creature I am. My ego is enormous, but I do not believe it. And that, perhaps, is the saving grace. So let us end where we began, with that airport, with that text, with that growl. The next time Ray texts me from the car, I will pause. I will breathe. I will feel the infant panic rise, and I will meet it with the adult's compassion. I will choose presence over the past, and I invite you to do the same. See the wound, name the pain, refuse the myth of normal, because healing is not a destination. It is a return, again and again, to the truth of who we are. Wounded, yes, but never beyond repair.